The bell was never meant to ring 13 times. In that village, everyone knew that. It had always stopped at 12, midnight, and silence. But on that night, the sound did not stop. The first ring came softly, carried by the cold wind that moved through the narrow dirt roads. Most people were asleep. A few candles still burned in windows, flickering against wooden walls. Dogs shifted in their sleep. Horses stamped in their stalls. The second ring came louder. A widow named Martha opened her eyes. She had lived beside the church for 40 years. She knew every sound it made, the groan of its doors, the hum of wind through its cracks, the tired cry of its rope pulley. This sound was different. By the third ring, she was sitting upright in bed. No one rings the bell at midnight, she whispered to herself. The fourth ring echoed across the valley. The mountains threw the sound back like a warning. At the fifth, lights began to appear in other homes. Curtains moved. A child started crying somewhere down the lane. The sixth ring was slower, heavier. Martha stepped out of bed and moved toward the window. The church stood on a small hill, black against the sky. No lantern burned inside the tower. No shadow moved behind its narrow windows. The seventh ring trembled through the ground. Now doors were opening. Men stepped outside holding lanterns. They looked toward the hill, confused, annoyed, afraid. Who's up there? Someone shouted. There was no answer. The eighth ring came with a sudden gust of wind that made the trees bend. The air felt colder, sharper, like winter had returned without warning. The ninth ring sounded cracked, strained. Old Thomas, the blacksmith, grabbed his coat and started walking toward the church. Others followed. No one wanted to be alone. The 10th ring made a horse break free from its post. The 11th caused a baby to scream. The 12th vow as it always had for decades. Steady. Certain. Final. That should have been the end. But the rope inside the tower did not fall silent. For a moment, there was a pause, a breath held by the entire village. Then came the 13th ring. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was deep. So deep it felt as if it came from underground. Every lantern flame flickered at once. Martha felt her knees weaken. Thomas stopped walking. The wind died completely. And then, nothing. No 14th ring. No footsteps in the tower. No movement in the sky. Just silence. A silence so complete it swallowed the night. The villagers stood frozen, staring at the church. Who rang it? Someone whispered. No one answered. Thomas was the first to climb the hill. He pushed the heavy wooden doors open. They creaked loudly, the sound echoing inside the empty building. The pews were untouched. The altar candles were cold. The rope that controlled the bell hung still, perfectly still, as if it had never been moved. There were no footprints in the dust, no sign of forced entry, nothing. One by one, the villagers entered behind him. Lantern light danced across stone walls. Faces looked pale, uncertain. This isn't right, Martha said softly. The priest, Father Edwin, arrived last. He looked at the rope for a long time without speaking. The bell only rings when pulled, he said finally, but no one pulled it. Thomas replied. They searched the tower, step by step, breath by breath. They climbed the narrow spiral staircase. At the top, the bell hung above them, still, heavy, silent. There was no one there, no hidden mechanism, no broken beam. Nothing that could explain 13 rings. The wind returned suddenly, rushing through the tower window. It made the lanterns flicker wildly. Father Edwin crossed himself. We'll go home, he said. We'll pray. Reluctantly, the villagers obeyed. One by one, they descended the hill and returned to their houses. Doors closed. Windows latched. Candles blown out. Martha stood at her doorway for a long time before going inside. She could not shake the feeling that something had changed, that the 13th ring had meant something. The night passed without further sound. No screams, no fires, no storms, just darkness. But when the sun rose, the village did not wake, because there was no one left to wake. The milkman's cart stood abandoned in the road. A loaf of bread burned inside the baker's oven. Lanterns still hung outside doors. Beds were empty. Cups sat half full on tables. Every house was open. Every room untouched. No signs of struggle, no blood, no broken furniture, no footprints leading away. The entire village was gone. Horses remained in their stalls. Dogs wandered freely, confused. Smoke rose from chimneys where fires had not yet died. But there were no people. Travelers passing later that morning stopped in shock. They called out. They searched every building. Nothing. It was as if the air itself had swallowed them. Word spread quickly to neighboring towns. Search parties were formed. Soldiers came. Investigators examined every inch of land. They found no graves, no tracks, no signs of attack. The church bell rope still hung motionless. When questioned, Father Edwin insisted the bell had rung 13 times. Others confirmed it. But no one could explain how. Days turned into weeks. The village remained empty. Some said the people fled together in the night, though no one could explain why they would leave everything behind. Some whispered about curses. Others blamed madness. But one fact never changed. The bell had rung 13 times. Years passed. The buildings decayed slowly. Wood rotted. Roofs collapsed. Grass swallowed the roads. Travelers avoided the place. They said that sometimes when the wind was just right, you could hear a distant ringing echo across the valley. Not 12, 13. And always at midnight. No one ever moved back. No one dared rebuild. The church tower still stands there, broken but upright, staring over an empty field where a village once lived. Historians still debate what happened that night. They study weather patterns, social tensions, hidden conflicts. But none of their theories answer the simplest question: who rang the bell? And why 13? Some believe the bell did not call the villagers to prayer. They believe it called them somewhere else. Somewhere no one could follow. And if you ever find yourself near that valley, and if the night is very still, and if you hear the bell begin to ring, count carefully, because if it reaches 13, you may not see the morning. It began with an echo, not a ring, not a strike, an echo, as if the sound had already happened somewhere else and was only now arriving. The valley was quiet that night. Too quiet. Even the wind had settled into the trees like it was afraid to move. Houses sat in darkness, wooden beams cooling after a long summer day. Crickets hummed softly in the fields. Then midnight came, and the bell rang, one slow strike. The sound rolled down the hillside and spilled into the valley like water. No one moved at first. The church bell marked time. It always had. 12 strikes at midnight. That was normal. The second strike followed, then the third. Inside a small farmhouse at the edge of town, a boy named Caleb opened his eyes. He listened carefully, counting under his breath. 4, 5. His mother turned in her sleep beside the fireplace. 6. The sound felt different tonight. Longer. Hollow, as if the bell were ringing inside a cave. 7. Caleb sat up. 8. He looked toward the window. The moonlight was pale and thin, barely touching the fields. 9. A dog began barking somewhere in the distance. 10. Now lights were appearing in windows across the valley. 11. A door creaked open down the road. 12. That should have been the end. The final strike faded into the hills. Silence returned. But the echo did not. It lingered. It rolled back. It came again. The 13th sound was not a strike. It was a vibration. A low hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Caleb felt it through the wooden floor beneath him. His mother sat up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" He nodded. Outside, more doors were opening. Lanterns flickered on porches. Men stepped into the dirt road, looking toward the church that stood high above them on its hill. "There's no one up there." Someone called out. "There shouldn't be." Another replied. The church had been locked since evening service. The priest had left before sunset. No events. No gatherings. Yet the bell had rung, and the echo still hung in the air. Caleb stepped outside barefoot. The night felt colder than it should have. Across the valley, something felt wrong. Not broken. Not loud. Just wrong. The echo came again. Not from the bell this time. From the hills. As if something far away was answering. A woman gasped, "Why is it still echoing?" No one answered. They all heard it. The original strike had ended, but the sound was repeating itself from somewhere unseen. like the valley itself was ringing back. The priest, Father Matthew, hurried up the hill toward the church doors. Several men followed him. "Stay with your families," he shouted over his shoulder. No one listened. Inside the church, everything was dark. The pews were empty, the altar untouched. The rope that controlled the bell hung still, completely still. Father Matthew grabbed it. Cold, unmoved, he looked up toward the tower. It wasn't pulled, he whispered. Behind him, the men shifted nervously. Then they heard it again. Not above them. Not inside the tower. Outside, across the valley. The echo rolled through the fields once more, long and low, like a warning carried on invisible waves. Back in the village, doors were now wide open. People stood frozen in their thresholds, unsure whether to go inside or step into the street. Caleb's mother grabbed his hand tightly. "Get inside," she said. But he couldn't look away from the hills. For a moment, he thought he saw something move along the ridge. A shadow. Too large to be a person. Too smooth to be an animal. Then it was gone. The echo stopped. Completely. The valley fell into silence. A silence heavier than before. The priest descended the hill slowly. "It's over," he said, though he did not sound certain. One by one, people retreated into their homes. But no one closed their doors. Not fully. Something about shutting them felt dangerous. As if closing the door meant sealing something inside. Or keeping something out. Candles burned low through the night. No one slept. They waited. For another strike, for another echo, for something. But nothing came. Hours passed. The sky began to lighten. Birds should have started singing. They didn't. The first traveler arrived at dawn, riding through the valley on his way to the next town. He slowed his horse as he entered the main road. Every door was open. Not broken, not forced, just open, gently, as if every family had stepped outside at the same moment and never returned. The horse neighed nervously. The traveler called out, "Hello." No answer. He dismounted and walked to the nearest house. Inside, a kettle boiled dry over a weak flame. A chair lay tipped over. A candle had burned down completely. Wax pooled across the table. But there were no people. He checked another home, and another, all the same, beds empty. Food left out, but clothing scattered. But no signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks. The dirt roads outside were smooth, undisturbed. The traveler rode up to the church. The doors were open there too. Inside, sunlight spilled across empty pews. The rope hung untouched. The valley was silent, not abandoned, erased. Search parties came by noon from neighboring towns. They combed the fields. They climbed the hills. They searched the riverbanks. Nothing. No bodies. No footprints. No wagons missing. Animals remained tied in barns, hungry and confused. It was as if, at the moment the echo ended, every human being had simply stepped out of existence. Weeks passed. The houses remained open. Doors creaked in the wind. Curtains moved at night. Travelers avoided the valley after sunset. Some claimed they heard it. That echo, faint, rolling through the hills at midnight. Not loud, not sharp. Just a reminder, as if the valley itself had swallowed a secret and refused to let it go. Years later, investigators would argue over what happened. Mass hysteria, a coordinated disappearance, an unknown disaster. But none could explain one detail. Why every door was left open, not locked, not barricaded, open. As if everyone had stepped outside at the same time to answer something calling them. And if you stand in that valley today, when the air is still and the sky is dark, you might feel it. A low vibration beneath your feet. A memory of sound, an echo waiting to return. And if it does, you might not close your door either. No one saw it move. That was the first thing everyone agreed on. The bell rope never moved. The tower window never opened. No shadow crossed the chapel walls. And yet, at exactly 1 hour past midnight, the bell began to toll. The chapel stood at the edge of a wide stretch of farmland, surrounded by tall grass and scattered oak trees. It was small, older than the village itself, built from stone that had darkened with time. The bell inside its narrow tower had been silent for years, except during weddings and funerals. That night, There was no wedding. There was no funeral. There was only silence, until the bell rang. One deep toll rolled across the fields. Inside the nearest farmhouse, the Carter family stirred in their sleep. Jonathan Carter opened his eyes first. He lay still, listening. He knew the sound well. His father had once pulled that rope during Sunday service. He knew how it felt in the hands. This sound felt heavier, slower. The second toll came. His wife, Eleanor, shifted beside him. "Is there a service tonight?" she murmured. "No," Jonathan whispered. The third toll echoed through the wooden beams of their house. Their daughter, Emily, sat up in her small room down the hall. She wrapped her blanket tightly around her shoulders. The fourth toll seemed to last longer than it should have. Jonathan rose from bed and walked to the window. The chapel stood a short distance away, moonlight brushing against its stone walls. The tower window was dark. The fifth toll came. No flicker of light inside, no movement near the door. The sixth toll vibrated through the glass. Eleanor joined him at the window. "Who's up there?" Jonathan didn't answer. The seventh toll rang. Down the dirt road, another farmhouse door opened. A man stepped outside with a lantern, staring toward the chapel. The eighth toll sounded. The wind picked up suddenly, bending the grass in uneven waves. The ninth toll cracked slightly at the end, as if the bell itself was straining. Jonathan felt unease settle deep in his chest. The 10th toll rang. Emily stepped quietly into the hallway, watching her parents from the shadows. The 11th toll rolled across the farmland, echoing longer than the others. Jonathan grabbed his coat. "Stay inside," he told Eleanor. The 12th toll came. That should have been the end. The bell always rang 12 times at midnight. Nevermore, they all waited. The air felt tight. The grass outside stopped moving. Even the insects seemed to fall silent. Then came the 13th toll. It was not struck hard. It was not rushed. It was deliberate, slow, deep, and impossibly loud. Eleanor gasped. Emily covered her ears. Then Jonathan felt it in his bones. Then silence, complete and sudden. Jonathan opened the front door and stepped outside. The night air felt colder than before. Other neighbors stood in their yards, confused and pale. "Did you see anyone?" Someone called out. "No," another replied. Jonathan began walking toward the chapel. 2 other men followed. The chapel door was closed, not locked, just closed. Jonathan pushed it open slowly. The hinges groaned softly. Inside, the air felt heavy and still. The pews were empty. The candles were unlit. Moonlight slipped through stained glass, casting faint colors on the stone floor. The rope that controlled the bell hung from the ceiling, perfectly still. Jonathan walked toward it. He reached out and touched it. Cold, unmoved. He looked up toward the tower opening above. Nothing. The other men searched the small room. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. No one hiding in the corners. "It rang?" one man whispered. Jonathan nodded. It did. They climbed the narrow wooden ladder to the bell tower. A bell hung above them, heavy and silent. The clapper rested against its side. There was no mechanism, no hidden device, no person. Just the bell. They returned to the ground slowly. Outside, neighbors waited. What happened? Eleanor called from a distance. Jonathan shook his head. No one. That night, no one slept. Lanterns burned until dawn. People watched their doors, listened for movement, waited for another toll. None came. When the sun rose, light spilled across the farmland gently, almost peacefully. Eleanor woke first. The house felt quiet, too quiet. She reached for Jonathan. The bed beside her was empty. She assumed he was outside. She stepped into the hallway. "Emily," she called softly. No answer. She checked her daughter's room. The bed was empty. Blankets folded back as if she had simply stepped out. Eleanor's heart began to race. She hurried outside. The yard was empty. No sign of Jonathan. No sign of Emily. She ran down the dirt path toward the fields. "Jonathan!" she shouted. No response. Other neighbors were emerging from their homes now, confused, pale. And then someone screamed. From the Carter farmhouse. Eleanor froze. She turned slowly. Neighbors were standing in her doorway, staring inside. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaking. One of them looked at her with wide eyes. "You were just here." Eleanor felt the world tilt slightly. "I was—" They stepped aside. She walked back into her house. Everything looked normal. The kitchen table still held last night's cups. Jonathan's coat lay on the chair. Emily's shoes rested by the door. But the bed she had just left moments ago was made, perfectly made, cold. As if no one had slept there. Eleanor felt her breath shorten. "That's not right," she whispered. Neighbors began searching the fields immediately. They called for Jonathan, for Emily. They searched the barn, the riverbank, the nearby woods. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. By noon, the entire farmland knew the Carter family was gone. Jonathan, Eleanor, Emily, never found. Their home remained untouched, clothes in closets, food in cupboards, money in drawers, nothing missing. The chapel bell never rang again. Years passed. Investigators came and went. They searched for hidden tunnels, secret enemies, signs of escape. They found none. The only strange detail remained the same. The bell had tolled without a hand, 13 times. Some say the 13th toll was not a warning. It was a call, and the Carters answered it. Others believe the sound marked the exact hour something unseen crossed into that farmland. Whatever the truth, one fact never changed. No one saw the rope move, and the Carter family was never found. Even now, when the wind blows through the old chapel tower, some claim they can hear a faint vibration in the air, not loud, not clear, just a low hum, like a bell waiting to be struck. And if you ever hear it, count carefully, because sometimes the sound does not need a hand. It only needs someone listening. The evening the bell shook the sleeping town, and shadows took them all. Script begins below. The bell did not just ring that evening. It shook. It trembled so violently that dust fell from the rafters of the old church tower, and birds sleeping along the roof burst into the air all at once. It was just after sunset. The town was quiet in the way small towns often are. Supper dishes were being washed. Children were being called inside. Lamps were being lit one by one along the main street. No one expected the bell to ring. There was no service scheduled. No wedding. No warning of fire. And yet, without a hand pulling the rope, without a storm in the sky, the bell exploded into motion. The first strike was so hard it sounded like metal cracking. People froze where they stood. The second strike followed immediately, louder, sharper. Windows rattled. A glass shattered inside the general store. "What in the world?" Mr. Hanley muttered as he stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. The third strike shook the ground beneath their boots. Inside a small house at the edge of town, a young woman named Clara dropped the plate she was drying. It hit the floor and broke cleanly in two. Her younger brother, Samuel, looked toward the door. "Is that a storm?" "There's no clouds," Clara replied softly. The fourth strike rang out. The sound did not roll gently across the rooftops like it normally did. It punched through the air. The fifth strike came with a strange vibration, almost like a second sound hiding inside the first. People were stepping into the street now, staring up at the church tower that stood at the highest point of town. The rope could be seen through the narrow window. It was swinging wildly. But no one was there. The sixth strike made a horse rear back and break free from its post. The seventh caused every dog in town to begin howling at once. Clara stepped outside with Samuel close behind her. The sky above them was a deep orange fading into purple. Everything looked normal, except the bell. The eighth strike cracked through the air, and the vibration that followed felt wrong. It felt alive. It felt alive. The ninth strike made Samuel grab Clara's hand tightly. "Why is it shaking like that?" he whispered. She had no answer. The 10th strike came slower, but heavier, as if something enormous had taken hold of the bell and was forcing it to move. The 11th strike echoed strangely, not outward, downward, like it was sinking into the earth. People began backing toward their homes. The 12th strike rang, long and loud. That should have ended it. The bell always stopped at 12. Always. The rope inside the tower snapped upward violently. For 1 second, there was silence, a silence filled with dread. Then the 13th strike came. It was not just sound, it was force. The air itself seemed to ripple. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the street, growing longer even though the sun had already set. Clara felt cold rush over her skin. Samuel squeezed her hand tighter. And then the shadows moved. Not from people, not from trees. They peeled away from the ground. They slid across walls. They rose like smoke, but darker, thicker. Someone screamed. The 14th strike never came. There were only 13. But the shaking did not stop immediately. The bell continued to vibrate for several seconds after the final toll, humming low like a living thing. The shadows flowed through the streets. They slipped under doors. They climbed walls. They wrapped around lampposts and windows. Clara tried to pull Samuel toward their house, but the darkness at their feet moved faster than they could. It reached Samuel first. He gasped, not in pain. In surprise, his hand slipped from hers, and he was gone, not fallen, not dragged, gone. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding violently in her chest. Around her, neighbors were vanishing the same way. No blood, no struggle, just sudden absence. A man reached for his wife. His arms closed around empty air. A child ran toward her mother. She disappeared mid-step. The shadows did not attack. They absorbed. They swallowed. They erased. Clara backed against the wooden wall of her house. Her breath came in short bursts. The town that had been full only moments ago was dissolving into silence, one by one, until only a few figures remained scattered along the street. The bell finally stopped moving. Its final vibration faded into the dark sky. The shadows froze, then slowly retreated. They slid back across the ground, climbed the church walls, and disappeared into the tower window. Clara was alone, completely alone. The entire street stood empty. Doors hung open. Lamps flickered weakly. Dishes lay abandoned on tables visible through windows. But there were no people. Not a single voice. Not a single breath. She walked slowly down the center of the street. Samuel. She called. Her voice echoed too loudly. No answer. She checked the houses one by one. Beds still warm. Food still on plates. Clothing half folded. Everything left exactly as it had been seconds before. But no one inside. She made her way to the church, her legs shaking. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the rope hung still. Dust floated gently in the dim air. She stepped closer to the center aisle. The chapel felt larger now. Empty. She looked up at the tower. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift in the darkness above. A faint movement. Like a shape pressing against the inside of the bell. Watching. She stumbled backward and ran from the building. By the time full night fell, the town was silent. Completely. Travelers passing through the next morning found it that way. Empty homes. Open doors. Meals uneaten. Animals wandering freely. No signs of violence. No tracks leading away. Nothing missing except the people. Investigators came. They searched wells, cellars, forests. They found no bodies, no clues, no explanation. Only one witness remained, Clara. She told them about the bell, about the 13th strike, about the shadows. Most did not believe her. They said fear had confused her memory. That panic had created illusions. But she knew what she saw. Years later, the town still stands abandoned. Buildings leaning, paint peeling, grass growing through cracks in the road. The church tower remains upright. The bell still hangs inside, rust creeping along its edges. Clara never left the valley. She built a small cabin far from the town. Some nights, when the wind is still, she hears a faint vibration in the distance. Not a full strike, just a low tremor, like metal remembering movement. And every evening, as the sun begins to set, she watches her shadow carefully, because she knows something most people do not. The bell does not need to ring again. The shadows already know the way back. At first, no one noticed. The bell was ringing. That was normal. It was late evening, just before full dark, when the sky still held a thin line of fading gold. People were finishing their day. Shopkeepers were closing shutters. Children were being called home. The smell of bread and wood smoke drifted gently through the streets. The bell rang once. clear, familiar. A few heads lifted toward the church tower out of habit. The second ring followed, then the third. No one counted carefully at first. The bell often marked the hour. It was part of the rhythm of life. It meant everything was as it should be. The fourth ring echoed down Main Street. Mrs. Alder paused while sweeping her porch. The fifth rang. A group of boys kicking a ball in the road slowed their game. The sixth. A dog began barking, sharp and nervous. The seventh. The baker stepped outside his shop, wiping flour from his hands. The eighth. Something felt slightly wrong now. The ninth ring did not fade quickly. It lingered in the air longer than it should have. The 10th came almost too fast after it. People began looking at one another. Is it a celebration? Someone asked. There's no event tonight, another replied. The 11th ring struck harder. Windows trembled faintly. The 12th rang out. That should have been the end. It always ended at 12. But the bell did not stop. The 13th ring crashed through the air. A child covered his ears. The 14th followed immediately, louder, more violent. The rope inside the tower could be seen swinging wildly through the narrow opening. But no one was in the window. The 15th strike rang out. Now people were stepping into the street fully, staring upward. The bell was not slowing. It was accelerating. 16, 17, 18. The sound began to overlap itself, each strike crashing into the next. The metal clanged with a desperate intensity, like it was being forced beyond its limit. Thomas Reed, who lived directly across from the church, ran toward the entrance. "This isn't right," he shouted. The 19th ring shook dust loose from the church roof. The 20th rang. The sound was no longer just heard. It was felt. A vibration in the ribs. A pressure in the skull. The 21st strike came with a sharp crack, as if the bell might split open. People began retreating backward. The 22nd rang. The ground beneath their feet trembled faintly. "Make it stop!" Someone screamed. Thomas reached the church door and forced it open. Inside, the sound was deafening. The bell swung violently above the nave. The rope whipped through the air, snapping like a live thing. But there was no one holding it. No mechanism pulling it. Nothing but empty space beneath it. The 23rd strike rang. Thomas tried to grab the rope. The moment his fingers touched it, a shock ran through his arm and threw him backward across the wooden floor. The 24th rang. Outside, windows began to crack. Glass shattered along the street. The 25th strike echoed like thunder. The sky above the town darkened unnaturally fast. Clouds seemed to swirl directly above the church tower. The bell would not fall silent. 26, 27, 28. The rhythm was gone now. It was chaos. A relentless assault of sound that erased thought itself. People began covering their ears, dropping to their knees. The streets felt smaller, the air thicker. On the 29th strike, something changed. The sound stopped echoing outward. It turned inward. The vibration pulled toward the church instead of away from it. Dust, leaves, loose paper from shop counters be sliding across the ground toward the tower. The 30th strike rang. A woman standing near the fountain screamed as her hat lifted from her head and flew toward the church door. The 31st. A wooden sign tore loose from its hinges and scraped across the road. The 32nd. People felt their feet shift slightly, boots dragging inches across the dirt. The 33rd. Thomas struggled to stand inside the church, gripping a pew. The rope snapped back and forth above him, wild and furious. The 34th strike hit. Outside, the first person vanished. He did not fall. He did not cry out. He simply blurred, like smoke caught in wind, and was gone. The 35th strike followed. Another disappeared, then another. The bell continued without pause. 36, 37. The town began emptying not by movement, but by absence. People faded where they stood. Hands reaching for loved ones closed on air. Mothers turned to find children no longer beside them. The fathers shouted names into streets that answered only with ringing metal. 38, 39, 40. The sound was constant now, a storm of iron and echo. Thomas crawled toward the doorway of the church. He saw the street beyond, emptying piece by piece. 41, 42. The last group of townspeople stood huddled near the well. They tried to run, but there was nowhere to run. 3, 44. One by one, they vanished. No bodies, no blood, no shadow left behind. Just space where life had been. 45. The bell finally cracked. A visible fracture split along its rim. 46. The sound became distorted, broken, like a scream. 47. Thomas reached the doorway and looked out. The entire street was empty. Doors hung open. Lamps burned unattended. Laundry fluttered on lines. But there was no one. 48. He was alone. The final strike came without a number. It was not louder than the others. It was final. A single deep tone that rolled outward and then collapsed into silence. The bell stopped. The rope fell limp. Thomas staggered into the middle of the road. "Hello," he called. His voice echoed unnaturally loud. No answer. Not a single human sound. He ran from house to house. Every room was abandoned mid-moment. Meals half-eaten, books open, shoes left by doors. The entire town had turned empty forever. By morning, travelers arrived to find the same thing. An untouched town with no people inside it. Thomas was found sitting in the center of the road, staring at the church tower. He was the only one left. He told them about the bell, about the numbers climbing higher and higher, about the moment the sound pulled everything inward. Most believed the pressure had broken his mind. They said grief had created the story. But investigators counted something strange. The church bell had a fresh crack along its rim, as if it had been struck far beyond its limit. Thomas never left the town. He refused to go. He said if the bell ever rang again, someone had to be there to hear it. Years passed. The streets decayed slowly. Grass pushed through cracks in the road. Buildings sagged. The church tower leaned slightly to one side. But the bell still hangs there, split, silent, waiting. And sometimes, when the wind hits it just right, a faint metallic tremor drifts across the empty streets. Not a full strike. Not even a clear sound. Just a vibration, like something remembering how to begin again. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, soft and pale, but the valley remained eerily still. No birds sang. No wind moved the branches of the old oaks. Even the river, usually lively and glinting under the first sun, ran quietly, almost as if holding its breath. Then came the bell. It rang once, a sound so pure and clear it made the dewdrops on the grass tremble. At first it seemed normal, an ordinary morning chime, but the air around it was strange, heavy, empty, dead. The villagers stirred slowly. Windows opened. Eyes squinted. Hands rubbed sleep away. But nobody had moved near the church. Nobody had pulled the rope. The second ring followed almost immediately, more distinct, more commanding. Inside the manor at the edge of town, an elderly woman named Agnes lifted her head from the pillow. The old estate had stood empty for decades, its doors chained and its windows shuttered. But somehow, the bell was calling attention toward it. Calling something. The third ring echoed across the fields. She rose carefully, moving to the large front window. The fog clung low to the ground, curling around the iron gates and cobblestone paths of the manor. Light brushed the tower of the church, and she could just see the shadowed silhouette of the bell swinging gently back and forth. The fourth ring of vibration that passed through the floor of the manor. It was not violent. It was deliberate. A reminder. A summons. Agnes whispered to herself, "Who is out there?" The fifth ring came. Neighbors peered through curtains, blinking at the soft glow of dawn. Every door in the town was being left open, moving slightly as if pushed by unseen hands. The streets were silent, except for the bell. The sixth ring pulled at the air in the valley. The fog shifted. Shapes moved within it. Shadows of people, or something like people, danced just beyond visibility. Agnes felt a chill rise through her chest. She clutched the edge of the window. The manor had always been a place of mystery, doors locked, rooms sealed, as if the house itself feared something. The seventh ring came, slower this time, lingering in the valley. It was followed by a silence. The birds did not chirp. The river did not move. Only the manor remained untouched, silent, yet somehow alive. The eighth ring echoed sharply now, a warning. Agnes's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but her legs would not obey. The manor seemed to whisper from the shadows. The heavy doors that had never been opened, never even touched for decades, now seemed to wait, expectantly. The ninth ring rolled out over the town. Lanterns flickered in abandoned windows. Smoke rose from chimneys where fires had long died. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow stretched. The 10th ring shook the air, making dust fall from rafters and loose shingles rattle on roofs. The 11th rang. Something in the valley answered. A soft, indistinct echo, distant but growing closer. Agnes pressed herself against the window, frozen. The 12th rang, and the final normal strike, and then it did not stop. The 13th ring came. Long, deep, reverberating the bones of anyone who dared listen. Agnes's hands shook. The open doors of the manor seemed to beckon, not with light, but with absence, with promise of something inside she could not see. People in the town began disappearing. First the animals, then shadows that had been mistaken for humans, then the humans themselves. One moment they were there, the next gone. No struggle, no cry, no trace, only the open air where they had been standing. Agnes could not look away. She felt the manor calling to her. She wanted to run, but her feet were rooted. The bell continued to ring, the 13th strike stretching into eternity. She finally moved, slowly. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath her sounded impossibly loud. Each step toward the manor felt like it took hours. The front doors, chained for decades, were slightly ajar. Not a single lock had been broken. No signs of tampering. She paused, breath held. Then she stepped inside. The manor smelled of dust, of old wood, of cold stone. Sunlight fell through cracks in the ceiling, but the rooms were empty. Not a single piece of furniture had been moved, not a single painting touched. Yet, she felt watched. The air pressed against her chest. Every room whispered secrets she could not understand. The bell outside fell silent, and yet the manor remained alive. No one ever entered again. No one ever dared. The travelers would pass by and feel a chill, a pull, a weight of emptiness heavier than the coldest night. They would swear they heard the faintest toll, like the bell had never stopped. Decades later, the estate still waits. Doors sealed, windows shuttered. Trees lean over it protectively. And the bell remains inside the tower, silent, yet ready to call again if someone is foolish or brave enough to hear it. The town remembers. The valley remembers. And Agnes, she never left. She knows the secret of the dawn, the call of the bell, and the truth about the manor. Some nights, when the air is dead and still, travelers swear they hear it, a faint toll carried on the wind, a warning, a summons, a moment that should never have been. And the doors remain forever closed. If you want, I can continue Structure 7 and Structure 8 next, each in full cinematic 2000 word style like above, so all 8 structures are complete and ready for your video scripts. Do you want me to do that now? It started quietly. A single bell, far above the sleeping valley, cried into the night. Not a chime, not a ring, a cry, deep, mournful, echoing like it carried the grief of centuries. The village below slept, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. Dogs slept in warm barns. Children dreamed peacefully of games and sweets. Then the first cry came, sharp, sudden. Enough to wake a few curious villagers, but not enough to rouse the majority. The second cried out, lower and heavier. Some windows opened. Faces peered out, wary, confused. No one had touched the bell. The tower had been empty for years. Yet the sound carried, relentless and alive. The third cried, pulling at the hearts of those who listened. Inside the old family estate, at the edge of town, young Jonathan White stirred in his bed. He had heard the bell before, during weddings, funerals, and other town events. But this was different. It was sorrow made audible. The fourth cry rolled across the fields. Horses shivered in their stalls. A rooster crowed in fear. Jonathan's mother, Elizabeth, awoke. "Jonathan, do you hear that?" she whispered. "Yes, mother." "Something's wrong?" he replied, his voice tight with unease. The fifth cried. The air seemed heavier now. Each note pressed down on the rooftops, the streets, the people. They could feel it in their bones. By the sixth cry, other villagers were out in the streets, lanterns in hand, faces pale, eyes wide. No one could explain the sound. No one had pulled the rope. The seventh cried, longer and mournful. Inside the estate, Elizabeth gathered Jonathan and his younger sister, Lily. "Stay together," she instructed. "Do not go outside." The eighth cried. The sound seemed to twist, bending toward the estate. Shadows inside the house stretched unnaturally, as if something unseen was pressing against the walls. The ninth cried. Outside, townsfolk began disappearing. First the dogs, then the horses. Then one by one, people vanished from their doorsteps, mid-step, mid-word, leaving nothing behind except empty air and open doors. The 10th cried. Inside, the whites felt the pull of the bell. It was not merely sound. It was a force, something tangible, something that reached inside the house and touched their bones. The 11th cried. Elizabeth clutched her children tightly. "Hold my hand," she said, as the walls seemed to breathe around them. Every shadow stretched toward the family, seeking them. The 12th cried, the final normal strike. And then the 13th, it didn't happen. There was silence. For a moment, relief, almost, but the air felt wrong. Still. Heavy. Watching. The bell's sound had ended, but its presence remained. It lingered in every corner, every shadow, every heartbeat of the house. And then it began, a whisper in the darkness. A pressure that moved slowly from room to room. A shadow, darker than night, slipping through the hallways. The family tried to run, but there were no exits anymore. The doors closed silently, one by one, as if the house itself had absorbed them. Elizabeth screamed. Jonathan and Lily clung to her. The shadow touched them, not physically, but the moment it passed over them, they felt something vanish inside. Not just fear. Something permanent. They were gone. The townspeople had disappeared first. The White family vanished last. The estate stood intact, windows glowing with the first hints of dawn, yet inside, empty, no bodies. No sign of struggle, only the echo of 12 cries, 12 moments of grief that ended a bloodline. The bell remained silent after that night. The tower, abandoned and decaying, still stands. Travelers passing by swear they hear faint sobbing carried on the wind, a mournful, impossible sound. The estate, too, waits. Its doors closed. Its halls empty, the valley remembers. The trees whisper of a family erased in one night. The bells cry lives on, not as sound, but as warning. And should anyone enter the house, or climb the hill to the tower, the air presses against them like a memory. A memory of 12 cries. And the final cry that never came, because the bloodline had ended forever. Midnight came quietly. Too quietly. The town slept under a sky free of clouds, stars barely visible above the rooftops. A soft wind brushed along the streets, carrying the faint scent of smoke from last night's fires. Lamps glowed warmly in windows. Children slept in beds, unaware. Dogs curled in corners. Everything seemed normal. And then the bell began. It was a single strike at first. Clear, strong. Not alarming, just persistent. The second strike came quickly. People stirred. Windows cracked open. Eyes blinked sleep away. A few stepped outside, drawn by habit, by curiosity. The third strike rang. No one had touched the rope. The bell, which had always been silent at midnight, now echoed across the town, rolling down streets, over roofs, into the valley beyond. The fourth strike made the houses vibrate faintly. Dogs barked. Horses stirred. By the fifth strike, people had begun emerging from their homes. Lanterns shook in hands. Some called to neighbors, but no one responded. A soft tension hung in the air. Something was wrong. The sixth strike rang. And the seventh. The bell seemed to have a voice now. A rhythm beyond human understanding. Slow, heavy, pressing into the bones of everyone who listened. Inside one of the larger homes, a man named Harold and his wife, Margaret, rose from bed. Their children were still asleep. Harold opened the window. The bell's sound pressed into the room. It seemed to seep into the walls, the floorboards, the air itself. The eighth strike came. The sound was now a low vibration. Felt more than heard. It pressed on the chest, on the head, on the heart. People gasped, clutching themselves, unsure if they could breathe. The 9th strike. Harold held Margaret's hand. "We should stay together," he whispered. The 10th strike rang. Outside doors began swinging open. Not violent with wind, just open, inviting, and no one was inside to pull them. The 11th strike rang out. Windows rattled. Lanterns flickered. Shadows grew longer and darker. People began disappearing. Not screaming, not moving. They simply ceased to exist. Empty air remained where they had been. The 12th strike. The last normal strike. By this time, the town was in chaos. Some fled blindly into streets. Some froze in fear. The bell continued. The 13th strike came long, deep, reverberating. It did not echo away, it pulled inward, toward the center of the town. The 14th, the 15th, each strike faster, heavier, impossible to count. The sound became a storm. Felt in the teeth, in the chest, vibrating every bone. People disappeared. Slowly at first, then faster. Families vanished mid-step. Dogs yelped and were gone. Horses neighed and vanished. Streets emptied as though the air itself was swallowing life. Harold and Margaret clutched each other. Their children were gone. One moment they had been asleep. The next, nothing. They ran. The doors of every home were wide open. Lamps flickered and went out as they passed. Dust swirled around them in tight eddies. The bell continued. It was no longer a bell. It was a force. A living, breathing presence. It shook the streets, bent the air, pressed the shadows into corners. By the final strikes, the town was empty. Every building, every street, every doorway, every lamp untouched. Not a footprint. Not a broken object. Not a cry. Harold and Margaret ran to the church tower. Perhaps they could stop it there. Perhaps they could hide. The rope hung still. The bell was silent, yet the presence remained. Felt in every room, every street, every step. The air was thick, heavy, empty. By morning, the sun rose o'er a town with no inhabitants, no bodies, no clues, no trace of struggle. Only silence. Travelers passing later would notice the open doors, untouched windows, and the complete absence of life. No one ever returned. The bell never rang again. But some nights, when the wind is still and the moon is high, travelers claim they hear faint tolls echoing across the empty streets. Not 12. Not 13. Just enough to remind the living that the town was never truly empty. And by midnight, if the wind carries it right, the echo still waits. For anyone who dares listen. For anyone who dares step inside. Because if it finds you, you may not remain by morning.